Om Tavakatamratam Tapta Jivanam Kavivireditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadatam Bhuvivananti Bhurirajana. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. This, of course, is the verse that M chose to be chanted before reading of the Gospel of Ramakrishna. It represents the words of the gopis with reference to Sri Krishna. It's part of something called the Gopi Gita, and M felt that it was equally relevant to the words of Sri Ramakrishna. So he chose this, and this Tavakatamratam, Katamratam, he took that phrase from this verse to be used for the Bengali title of the Gospel of Ramakrishna, the Katamrata. Okay, now we are on page 126 in the English translation, Advice to Householders. It is Sunday, October 22nd, 1882. It was the day of Vijaya, the last day of the celebration of the worship of Durga, when the clay image is immersed in the water of a lake or river. This is a big celebration day, and especially in Bengal and Kolkata and Bellarmut also. I had a couple of different occasions to be at Bellarmut for the immersion and final day. The special feature of this day is that this is the one day of the year when all of the monks of the order will embrace each other. Yeah, the Premalingam, they call it Kolakuli. And of course the junior members will make pranam to the senior members. And generally, I don't know if they still do it, but in the earlier days, any special day, any birthday of a direct disciple, they still do, huh? And today, by the way, is Swami Abhedananda's birthday. So it's also the birthday of a direct disciple, that all the junior monks will go to make pranam to all of the monks at Bellarmut, even to go into Arogya Bhavan room by room to all of the retired Swamis there and everything. And this is the one day of the year that after you make pranam, then the seniors will embrace the juniors. So you'll get a big hug. It's very, very sweet, very wonderful that everyone is kind of on an equal footing as a brother that day. So this is that day, and then with the music and singing and dancing, they'll take the image of Mother Durga and right to the bank of the Ganga and immerse it in the river on that day. So it was the day of Vijaya, the last day of the celebration of the worship of Durga, when the clay image is immersed in the water of a lake or river. About 9 o'clock in the morning, M was seated on the floor of the master's room at Dakshineshwar, near Sri Ramakrishna, who was reclining on the small couch. Rakhal was then living with the master, and Narendra and Bhavanat visited him frequently. Baburam had seen him only once or twice. Now you'll remember that Rakhal was same age as Narendra Swamiji. They were both members of the Brahmo Samaj. They had become friends. They belonged to the same gymnasium. I don't think they went to the same school, but anyhow, he was recently married at that time, and it was through his father-in-law, Manamohan Mitra, that he came to meet Sri Ramakrishna. In those days, being married doesn't mean what we think of as being married exactly. His wife, most of the time, was still living with her family, and Rakhal would visit from time to time, but he also would stay with Sri Ramakrishna from time to time. And funny thing is that Rakhal's own father seemed to object more than his father-in-law, because he was a great devotee, this is Manomohan Mitra. And gradually Rakhal started staying more with Sri Ramakrishna than at his own home with his wife. He would go to visit from some time. And so it was kind of understood at some point that Rakhal would probably lead the life of a monk. And this happened sometimes in society of those days. The wife would be looked after nicely by both sides of the family. In some very orthodox families, she would continue to stay with her husband's family. And this is why when Sri Ramakrishna, before he passed away, he told Holy Mother that after he passed away, that he wanted her to stay in Kamarpukur. So in this case, it was kind of amicable. Rakhal brought his father to meet Sri Ramakrishna a couple of times, and it's recorded here. He was a worldly man. Not that he was a bad man or anything, but he was a kind of wealthy man, landlord. And Sri Ramakrishna used to say when he comes here and sees that other people of high position are here, that he won't feel so bad that Rakhal is there. So anyhow, he seemed to be resigned to the fact that Rakhal would stay with Sri Ramakrishna from time to time, and eventually, of course, when we get to Kashipur and everything, that he stayed there. And after that, they all renounced the world. Baburam, later Swami Premananda. Baburam Maharaj, he earlier, I don't know, even then was a student of M's, even then, but wasn't a good student and didn't care about it. And Sri Ramakrishna used to tease him, "Are you still studying?" But didn't really care whether he studied or not, because he knew that he would renounce the world. Baburam had the unique honor of being the one that Thakur felt was the purest of all of them. And he very much, even though Latu was staying there, Rakhal was staying there, there were two problems. One is that when Sri Ramakrishna went into Samadhi, he said that for some reason Baburam was so pure, he was the only one that he could bear the touch of. And it was necessary for somebody to hold him because he could fall down. If he stood up and went into Samadhi, he didn't know where he was, what he was doing. We know that at least on 2 occasions when no one was with him, he did fall. And one time he chipped his tooth, and one time he broke his arm. So he wanted the Baburam to stay with him, and eventually he did. But at this point, this is 1882, Baburam had only seen him once or twice, it says. Master, this is to M. Did you have any holiday during the Durga Puja? Normally everybody does. This will be like our Christmas vacation, that the schools will be closed and offices mostly will be closed. M. Yes, sir. I went to Keshab's house every day for the first 3 days of the worship. Now, M had been a member of the Brahmo Samaj, and his wife's husband, Ishan Kaviraj, was related, I think, to Keshab. Anyhow, they had a family connection with Keshab and also through the Brahmo Samaj. So he could go to Keshab's house. He was almost like one of the family. Master, is that so? M. I heard there a very interesting interpretation of the Durga Puja. Master, please tell me all about it. M. Keshab Sen held daily morning prayers in his house, lasting till 10 or 11. So this would have been a semi-private thing, just family and very close members. Otherwise, they had their hall. They had the place where they would have large meetings and things. But this was at the house for some reason. During these prayers, he gave the inner meaning of the Durga Puja. He said that if anyone could realize the Divine Mother, that is to say, could install Mother Durga in the shrine of his heart, then Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kartika, and Ganesha would come there of themselves. There's a footnote. According to Hindu mythology, Lakshmi and Saraswati are the daughters. Now, don't get confused, because There are all different relations and different things, different traditions. This just happens to be the one that we have here. When you see the image of Mother Durga for Durga Puja, you'll see all of them are there. And Kartika and Ganesha are the sons of Durga. Associated with the image of Durga, they occupy positions on both sides of the Divine Mother, and then you'll generally see that Mother has a trident and she's killing this Mahishasura, which will be some big water buffalo with a trident and everything. So this is part of this Navaratri, and sometimes there's some traditions that'll break it into 3 days, 3 days, 3 days. Mother in the form of Saraswati, in the form of Lakshmi, in the form of Durga. So something like that was taking place here, where he talked about each of them also. Now, what does it mean? That Lakshmi, so if you realize Mother Durga in the shrine of your heart, then Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kartika and Ganesha would come of themselves. Lakshmi means wealth. Lakshmi is the consort of Vishnu, but also goddess of wealth. Sometimes, and this is another interesting thing, when Sri Ramakrishna spoke of Holy Mother, he would identify Holy Mother in different ways at different times. Sometimes he would say Sharada, in Bengali it's Sara, plus Da, giver of wisdom. So that means Saraswati. He would say that she's Saraswati. And he noticed that she liked jewelry, and he had bangles made for her, and she had other things. She had a nose ring and an anklet and a few other things. Not that she was attached to it, but she liked it. And he used to say, why does she like it? Because she's Lakshmi herself. And then sometimes he would say she's Sita, and how she's locked up in that little Nahabad, like Sita was after she was kidnapped by Ravana. So Lakshmi means wealth. Now, whenever Sri Ramakrishna heard that spirituality was tied in with prosperity, he would react to that, because his idea of spirituality was a very pure ideal. And this is why he didn't like that Hazra also. Hazra used to say that if we realize God, then we'll also get some prosperity. There's a branch or a school of Christianity like that also, prosperity theology or something like that. That the sign of spirituality if you're also prosperous. But Thakur didn't like this type of idea. So he said that Lakshmi means wealth. This is him explaining what Keshab had said. Saraswati, knowledge, that's fine. Kartika, strength. And Ganesha, success. By realizing the Divine Mother within one's heart, one gets all these without any effort whatever. So probably what Thakur objected to more than anything was this idea of wealth. Because that means that there's a little hidden self-interest and selfish desire. Worshipping the Mother, one shouldn't ask for anything except love of God. This was Thakur's idea, to pray for pure love, to pray to Durga in the form of Lakshmi for wealth was a very compromising thing in his mind. So, Sri Ramakrishna listened to the description, questioning M now and then about the prayers conducted by Keshab. Now, he doesn't want to criticize Keshab directly, but he's very interesting the way he puts it. At last he said to M, don't go hither and thither. Don't go here and there. Come here alone. Those who belong to the inner circle of my devotees will come only here. Because there'll be some confusion in the mind. Not that Thakur had any exclusivity or secretness or anything like that. But he knew that some of these other teachers would emphasize things that wouldn't be helpful for M. He knew the very first meeting. He could read M's mind. He knew what his spiritual journey would be like and what would be helpful and what wouldn't be helpful. Then he says, boys like Narendra, Bhavanat, and Rakhal are my very intimate disciples. So he starts talking about those who belong to the inner circle of my devotees will come only here. He's indicating that M is a member of the inner circle, because he says first, don't go here and there, simply come to me. Those who belong to my inner circle will only come here. Now he's saying, who else is there? So we find when we talk about the antaranga bhaktas, that it doesn't simply mean the householders. It will include certainly M. It will include certainly Balaram Bose. After that, we assume that Narendra and Girish and Ram, and there'll be others. Thakur is never very specific. He's more specific about naming who the Ishvara Kotis are and the Nitya Siddhas and his monastic disciples. But it's clear that M, at least, and other householders belong to the inner circle, according to Thakur's understanding. Boys like Narendra, Bhavanath, and Rakhal are my very intimate disciples. They are not to be thought lightly of. They're young boys. This was so shocking to everybody, how Sri Ramakrishna would compare Narendra to Keshab and say whatever Keshab has, Narendra has 100 times the virtues that he had. They would be shocked, this 18-year-old boy compared to this world-renowned orator who had been to London, to England, who had met Queen Victoria, who had such a huge following, was so highly honored, and Narendra was nobody. He came from a good family and he was very brilliant, but other than that, he was just a schoolboy at the time. So he's saying all of them, Narendra, Bhavanath, Rakhal, they are not to be thought lightly of. Feed them one day. Now, Thakur always felt that it was very auspicious for the householders to feed them, because feeding them, he felt, would be the same merit as feeding sadhus, feeding holy men, and seeing God in them, that they were very pure. So this would be very helpful and auspicious for M himself, and helpful for those boys also. He wanted to see this relationship between all of the disciples. He wanted to see this friendship, this loving relationship there. Then he says, what do you think of Narendra? Now, Thakur had two ways of judging people. More than two, but at least in this context. One, he would ask them, what do you think of me? Huh? And just to see how deep their understanding was. Because Thakur, many people thought, oh, who is he? He's just some madman who's singing and dancing and falling unconscious and everything. So he wanted to see the depth of their understanding. And sometimes he would ask, what do you think of Narendra? And partly because he would be happy if they said, oh, how wonderful he is, this Narendra. Then he'd say, oh, since you're praising him, you must be a good person. So he's asking, what do you think of Narendra? Now remember that they had only met a few months earlier. They must have known each other, they must have seen each other at least at the Brahmo Samaj. But apparently they didn't know each other. Not that they would get big crowds there, not that everyone was on a first name basis with everyone at the Brahmo Samaj. M, I think very highly of him, sir. You remember at one of the early meetings that Narendra was there when M was there, and Sri Ramakrishna had specifically asked them to talk to each other, have a conversation together. And just the last time, I think, they were just the two of them talking together with a couple of other friends, and got into big trouble. They were gossiping about schoolboys nowadays. So they've already formed a friendship. Narendra Swamiji had this special capacity to form a friendship with people older than him on almost a one-to-one basis. It's very, very interesting, very nice. And it shows also the adaptability and flexibility, I think, of the older devotees. This is true in the case of Girish, who was so much older, that he and Narendra would visit. They would just chat like two friends. He would go to his house, and so M and Narendra also became friends like that. M, I think very highly of him. Master, haven't you observed his many virtues? He is not only well versed in music, vocal and instrumental. He played this tabla, of course, and pakawaj and tanpura. I don't know what else, but he came from a family that was quite well-to-do, at least before his father died, and he had tutors. So he learned all sorts of different arts and even horseback riding and other things like that. So he had lots of music teachers, so he was, and vocal, of course. But he is also very learned, and he was a voracious reader. Most of the time he would just barely go through his school books, and just enough so that he could pass all of the exams without any problem, but read all sorts of other things. He had a very inquisitive mind. His father was very, very fond of Persian poetry. There's Hafiz, the Swami likes so much. He was also very fond of that, and apparently could read Persian. Persian is not so different, I guess, from Urdu, and learned people in those days studied these things. So his father also was a little bit of an intellectual, though he was more of an attorney and a business person. Besides, he has controlled his passions and declared he will lead a celibate life. He has been devoted to God since his very boyhood. Then he changes the topic. How are you getting along with your meditation nowadays? What aspect of God appeals to your mind, with form or without form? Now, Sri Ramakrishna, he had a habit of letting people follow their own inclination for some time, and guiding them gently in one way, one direction or another. He had this idea of this ruchi bheda that we find over and over again, that we all have a certain taste for a spiritual attitude or path, but sometimes we're not suited for it. So he would balance these two things, this hajam shakti, this power of digestion, and this taste. He would say in food, the mother knows what food the child likes, but also knows what food the child can digest. He would balance these. So he wants to know what appeals to M, and then he'll try to explain to M what's good for him. So at this point, it seems that he hasn't given M any direct spiritual instruction with regard to meditation, anything like that. He's letting M kind of feel his way, and he wants to see where M is at, because in the beginning we find that he was very much against any type of worship of God with form. I'll get to that in a minute, but so he says, how are you getting along with your meditation nowadays? What aspect of God appeals to your mind, with form or without form? Nirakar was sakar. Sa-akara, nir-akara. This was a big issue at that time. I'll get to it in a minute. M. Sir, now I can't fix my mind on God with form. On the other hand, I can concentrate steadily on God without form. Okay, so he's like the rest of us. That trying to fix the mind on God with form, the image floats away, maybe for a few seconds, it seems to be there, then it's gone. God without form, we don't know what to do. What do we even think of? What do we picture? So explaining that really the difficult nature of meditation in itself. Master, now you see that the mind cannot be fixed all of a sudden on the formless aspect of God. So he's saying that this formless aspect is a more advanced stage. It is wise to think of God with form during the primary stages. M. Do you mean to suggest that one should meditate on clay images? Okay, now, this is something that I find very interesting, that Sri Ramakrishna has one thing in mind, I think, when he talks about sakara, God with form, and the devotees, especially the Brahmos, have something else in mind to a certain extent. Almost always, as soon as they hear this Sakara Puja, they think of image worship. And for the Brahmos, this was a great no-no. This was taboo. They weren't allowed, even they signed a pledge They wouldn't go inside the temple and bow down before the image, anything like that. So there's image worship with something that they look down upon. Why did they look down upon it? Mostly the influence of the British. Now, when we look at other religious traditions, we find in the West, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Judaism and Islam especially, and Islam even more, they have no concept of any form of God. That God is nirakar but saguna. That means that God has qualities of love and compassion and justice and mercy, all of these different things, but there's no form, and certainly no human form. And in Islam it goes so far as to lead to a kind of a ban on any human representation, and certainly of God, but even just in general. This is one of the reasons why Islam has such a highly developed form of calligraphy and mosaic work and other types of art, because they didn't go for this painting and drawings of human form. Anyhow, Christianity will have the same thing with regard to the Father, but not the Son. With regard to the Son, this iconography is very, very important, especially in the Orthodox traditions. Catholicism, to a certain extent, Orthodox traditions, all these beautiful paintings of Christ. But with regard to the God, the Father in heaven, also there's no image. There's nothing to think of. So in Sri Ramakrishna's mind, he is not necessarily thinking of this image in the shrine. He's not necessarily thinking of the clay image, which is the first thing that comes to M's mind. For him, what he sees in the state of bhava, in ecstasy, he'll see the form of the Divine Mother, or the form of Shiva, or the form of Krishna, different deities like that. He'll see that at the time of ecstasy, when the mind is soaring high on its way to the infinite absolute reality. And these are the different forms that maybe take some concrete shape with regard to a clay image, or with regard to photographs, something like that. But in Sri Ramakrishna's mind, that the image is just a symbol of the real thing. And when he has it, we hear about these visions of the Divine Mother and everything. Probably some of them, at least, is very distinctively with 4 arms and with the swords and all of these different things like that. So the first thing that comes to M's mind is that we're talking about the clay image. So M says, do you mean to suggest that one should meditate on clay images? Master, why clay? So he's expressing a little bit this idea that why does that come to your mind? The first thing you think of when we say a God with form. And even if that comes to your mind, facing it, you should see it as a symbol, or you should see it as a manifestation of divinity. And don't fix your mind on the fact that it's made of the 5 elements. Clay. Why clay? These images are the embodiment of consciousness, Chinmaya. So he uses this expression, Chinmaya. So even if worship of God with form indicates to us that we're going into a temple, at that time we should feel that we're face to face with the Divine Mother, not that we're just sitting in front of a stone image. So M is going to say, okay, I'll grant you that much. But if by meditation it means that the mind is thinking of that image, whether it's Chinmaya or whether it's Mrinmaya, he would say not Mrinmaya, Chinmaya, not made of clay, made of consciousness. Either way, there's still hands and feet and arms and all of these different things. So M says, even so, one must think of hands, feet, and the other parts of the body. So to M, he says, I'm supposed to be thinking of God and I'm thinking of physical form. So how is that going to help me? This is the doubt that he has. But he's starting to understand that his conception is incomplete or wrong. But again, I realized that the mind cannot be concentrated unless one meditates in the beginning on God with form. So this is a big step forward for M, because he wouldn't have said this in the very beginning. This is after Sri Ramakrishna has explained many things to him. You have told me so. So he, not just that he told him, but M was a thoughtful person. He's starting to understand that the mind needs to focus on something concrete, something tangible. Well, God can easily assume different forms. May one meditate on the form of one's own mother. Now, the little background is necessary here. This is 1982. M's mother passed away in, what did I say, 1882? In 1880. So that means that M was 25 or 26 years old, something like that. He was very attached to his mother. This is something very common in the household of that day. Swamiji himself very attached to the mother, because father was busy with all sorts of things. Of course, it's common throughout the world. And the mother is the one who really raises the child, gives spiritual instruction to the child, holds the family together, makes household decisions, all of that. So when M's mother died, this was the beginning of all of the problems in M's house, and why M was so unhappy living at home. He was already married. He got married in 1873, so he was probably not even 20. And there were some difficulties in the household, and he had to actually stop some of his studies and start working. He would have had even more degrees if it hadn't been for that. And there was always pressure from his father and his brothers, because his brothers lived at home also, for him to make more money. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that M's father had remarried at that point. You remember? Not sure. But anyhow, he was not at all happy at home and must have missed his mother very much. 25, 26 years old, to lose the mother, who was the most important member of the family, would have been a tremendous loss for M. So he's thinking that if I sit in meditation and I want to picture a form, and a human form, and I want that form to represent something that takes my mind higher, and that form that I can see the divine presence within, then Mother is the best. So he says, can I meditate on my own? He's saying, can one, but can one meditate? It means, can I do it? Can I meditate on my own mother? Now, Sri Ramakrishna was so liberal, and he knew M's mind. He knew a little bit. We don't find recorded in the Gospel M telling anything very definite about his family situation. But it's not impossible that he simply didn't record that. Possibly that Sri Ramakrishna knew that his mother had passed away at that time, and knew, I think his father remarried, which was also part of the problem. Didn't get along with his mother-in-law. That was the case with Rakhal. Rakhal's mother had passed away, and there was a stepmother, and anyhow. So what does Sri Ramakrishna say? Master, yes, the mother should be adored. She is indeed an embodiment of Brahman. We have another case where, was it Nistarani Devi? I'm not good with names, but she raised a nephew. They had no children at that time, and was very attached to this nephew, and she asked, could she meditate on this nephew as baby Gopal? And Sri Ramakrishna said, yes, serve this nephew as the baby Gopal. And she had various experiences, bhava, samadhi, and other things. The Thakur was very, very impressed through that type of spiritual practice. So, Master, yes, the mother should be adored. She is indeed an embodiment of Brahman. M sat in silence. After a few minutes, he asked the Master, what does one feel while thinking of God without form? This is a very good question. How do we do it? We may have this conviction that yes, in Brahman, how can there be any form in Brahman? And Brahman is infinite absolute consciousness. It's perfectly transcendent, pure. There's not a touch of prakriti. There's nothing changeful in it. If this is the goal of spiritual life, to realize this infinite absolute reality, then that should be what my meditation is on. But how do I do it? And it gets even trickier when we realize that this infinite absolute reality is myself, that it can never be objectified, that it's the meditator, is not the object of meditation. So how does the self, how does the subject become the object of my meditation if it's the pure subject? It gets very tricky. So M is asking that, how do you do it? And what does one feel while thinking of God without form? Isn't it possible to describe it? After some reflection, the Master said, do you know what it is like? Now, this is a very sad thing that we don't find out. He remained silent a moment and then said a few words to M about one's experiences at the time of the vision of God with and without form. So this is unrecorded. There is another regrettable time when Sri Ramakrishna is talking about the formation of blocks of ice in the ocean due to the cooling power of the love of the devotee, and how when the sun of knowledge arises, that these blocks of ice will melt back, going from form to formlessness. And then he says, but in some places it's so cold that they never melt back in, and they can turn to crystal. And then one of the devotees says to M, did you get that? And M said, no, I didn't get that. And neither of them asked Ramakrishna. So we don't, we never get a better explanation of that. So Sri Ramakrishna said, he says a few words to M. We don't know how long it was, or how much it was, or what it was. And then, Master, you see, one must practice spiritual discipline to understand this correctly. And this is something that Thakur always talked about. We can understand something intellectually, and we can understand it through spiritual practice, and we can understand it through direct experience. These are three different things. The understanding something intellectually is very important and very helpful in the beginning, so that we develop some conviction regarding the truth of it. But we should never think that an intellectual understanding has brought about anything very marvelous. It's the very first step. It allows us to proceed further. It's not some place where we can stop. You see, one must practice spiritual discipline to understand this correctly. Suppose there are treasures in a room. If you want to see them and lay hold of them, you must take the trouble to get the key and unlock the door. After that, you must take the treasure out. But suppose the room is locked, and standing outside the door, you say to yourself, here, I have opened the door. Now I have broken the lock of the chest. Now I have taken out the treasure. Such brooding near the door will not enable you to achieve anything. You must practice discipline. So as much as Sri Ramakrishna talks about the grace of God, as much as he talks about the need for surrender, the need for just giving up self-effort, all of these things, he gives equal, if not more, emphasis on doing spiritual practice, because we don't reach that other stage. Without doing spiritual practice, we can't reach the stage of sharanagati, of surrender. We may say at the very beginning, yes, whatever God does for me, it'll be fine. I'll be like the kitten and everything. But we have to have a very pure mind, and we have to really transcend this lower ego through a lot of spiritual discipline before we can really do that. Otherwise, it's just talk. Kotar kota. It doesn't have much meaning. So you must practice discipline. The jnanis think of God without form. Now we'll get a little bit of how this is done. They don't accept the divine incarnation. Now, this is the second clue about what we mean by worshiping God with form. That We can think of these gods and goddesses. This is one possible thing, that are Durga and Shiva, different aspects of the Divine Mother. Or we have the Divine Incarnation, which will be God taking human form. Of course, the early avatars, or we have our Matsya and Varaha and all of that, but present day understanding, or later understanding, will be the human form. Now, when it comes to our actual meditation, and it comes to our actual spiritual practices, there's not much difference whether the chosen ideal, the Ishtadevata, is Kali or Krishna. There's not much difference, even though we will say that one will be a deity somehow, and the other will be God taking human form, an avatar. For all practical purposes, there's not much difference. But with regard to this idea of God with form, we can say that, yes, here's an instance where the divine is manifest in human form. Now, the Jnanis will say each and every individual is an instance of God taking human form. That each and every one of us can say that. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says, you're right. Of course you're right. But there's a special sense, a special manifestation of divinity in these great souls. This modern day Buddha and Chaitanya and others, and the semi-legendary Ramakrishna and others, that they are similar to human beings in many respects, but in many ways that they represent a very special type of manifestation. So, worshiping God with form. Now we have three things. One, this idea that we're talking about some image in the temple. One, some divine deity or something, and then this avatar. Now there's another way of thinking of God with form. This whole universe is Virat. This is an Upanishadic idea, a very beautiful idea. The whole universe is the body of God. This is also God with form. And and if that's true, then we can worship anything, if we have that feeling behind it. Everything is a manifestation of the divine. Upanishadic idea, but also the Shakta idea. Thakur loved this idea. Everything is a manifestation. Why say a false projection or misreading of the Brahman, that take it in a positive sense? So now, what do the Jnanis think of this idea of the avatar as some unique type of thing? The Jnanis think of God without form, in general. They don't accept the divine incarnation. Now, this is traditional. And if we go to the Upanishadic period, they don't accept personal God really in any form, whether he's an avatar or this idea of praying to a deity and God possessing love and kindness and all of that. It was more impersonal, absolute. That was the idea we find in the Upanishads. But in the present context, I will say that those who are Jnanis in the Ramakrishna tradition, that for them, it's easier for them to accept the divine incarnation. So when Thakur says the Jnani doesn't accept the divine incarnation, he's talking about traditionally. Traditionally they don't. We look at Swamiji, who was a greater Jnani than Swamiji, and yet he called Thakur not only the Avatar Varishta, so the greatest of all avatars. So Sri Ramakrishna has given us a new understanding of this avatar, that like a human being in many respects, but the repository of so many divine qualities and attributes and spiritual strength and realizations, the power to bestow spiritual experiences on others, that we don't find it to such an extent. So for the Jnani, every wave, every individual is a wave on the ocean, but these avatars are a huge wave. It's very easy from the point of knowledge to accept this idea of the avatar. But he's talking about very traditionally in the Upanishadic period, or very strict followers. Even Shankaracharya, he had to accept it, the idea of avatar, because he's doing the commentaries on Gita and other things where it's such a prominent thing. Is it still? Huh? No. But he doesn't emphasize it too much. And he uses it jata eva, as if born. Of course, you can say that all of us as if born, but in any case, we shouldn't think that if we're jnanis, we can't accept the avatar. This is my point. And we'll find that many in our order who are really great jnanis, that means they have the highest conception of Brahman, and with form, without form, everything, they'll have the same type of reverence for Sri Ramakrishna as others. One or two exceptions. We have our Bharat Maharaj. He was very, very famous in our order, very wonderful soul, very loving soul and everything. Inwardly, what he felt about Sri Ramakrishna, we have no way of knowing. We know that he wouldn't have joined the order if he didn't have a special reverence. But he wouldn't go to the temple, he wouldn't bow down. He would sometimes peep in just to see the decorations and things like that. He was a real jnani that way. But it doesn't mean that he didn't look upon Sri Ramakrishna as the highest possible ideal. So we have that type of combination of the jnani and those who have devotion for the avatar. So Sri Ramakrishna is talking about the very traditional idea that the jnanis think of God without form. They don't accept the divine incarnation. Praising Sri Krishna, Arjuna said, "Thou art Brahman absolute." Sri Krishna replied, "Follow me and you will know whether or not I am Brahman absolute." So saying, Sri Krishna led Arjuna to a certain place and asked him what he saw there. "I see a huge tree," said Arjuna, "and on it I notice fruits hanging like clusters of blackberries." Then Krishna said to Arjuna, "Come nearer and you will find that these are not clusters of blackberries, but clusters of innumerable Krishnas like me, hanging from the tree." In other words, Thakur speaking, divine incarnations without number appear and disappear on the tree of the absolute Brahman. That means wave after wave will appear in this ocean of consciousness. And some will be huge waves, we'll call them avatars. Some will be smaller waves, we'll call them Ishvara Kotis. Some tiny waves, ripples, they'll be Jiva Kotis. Kabir Das was strongly inclined to the formless God. At the mention of Krishna's name, he would say, this was, I don't know much about him, but a devotee who would visit Ramakrishna from time to time. At the mention of Krishna's name, he would say, "Why should I worship him?" The gopis would clap their hands while he performed a monkey dance with a smile. "But I accept God with form when I am the company of people who believe in that ideal, and I also agree with those who believe in the formless God." Now, this goes back to what I think is one of the most important teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. We hear the Joto Ma Toto Pot. This is a very common thing. They even made a movie with that title. It came out when I was in India, actually. I saw that in 1978, I think. Joto Ma Toto Pot. As many faiths, so many paths. Now, this Mat is taken as faith because it refers to Sri Ramakrishna's practice of the different religions and things like that. But it also refers to worshipping God with form or without form. It refers to Advaita Vedanta, Vishishta Advaita Vedanta, Dvaita Vedanta, all of these different philosophies, philosophical systems, which the acharyas who developed them took them to be truth. They understood this to represent the final conclusion, Siddhanta. This is true. It's true that that there's no distinction between Atman and Jiva. Jiva, Atman, and Atman are one and the same, no distinction whatsoever. And then the qualified non-dualists will say, no, there are many Jivas. But they all dwell within God. That this is the truth. Now, Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Mot pot. Mot pot. It sounds like such a simple thing, but it's very, very deep. That all these things, mot, all of these philosophical systems, these are paths. They're not the goal. They're not a final truth. So Swami Krishna is saying that even, is it true that God has formed? Is it true that God has... These are different means by which, if we adopt this understanding, that this can take us to the highest type of realization. Don't go beyond that. Because he knew that truth meant experience. Truth meant realization. And he alone could say that. Many philosophers, I'm not saying that these great acharyas, they didn't have God realization. We understand them to be realized souls, but those who simply study the philosophy and take it from the point of view of logic, they'll think that they've come up with some logical truth, the same way that we have a mathematical truth or a scientific truth, that it's irrefutable, that there's something inherently true about it. For Ramakrishna, these were different attitudes, these were different ways, perspectives on things. Just as we describe a person in many different ways, use different names and everything, the real truth of it is the person. That's all. So he's saying that when I am in the company of people who believe in that ideal, I also agree with those who believe in the formless God. So I accept God with form when I am in the company of people who believe in that ideal. And I also agree with those who believe in the formless God. So for him, both were true. And I use the true in this relative sense, because he would say what Brahman is beyond all of this, beyond any description. Iti korajayana. We can't limit what Brahman is to any type of easy philosophical formula. M smiling. You are as infinite as he of whom we are talking. Truly, no one can fathom your depth. Master smiling. Ah, I see you have found it out. He had a wonderful sense of humor. Sri Ramakrishna. Let me tell you one thing. Now, this is very interesting, and I don't think we find it anywhere else. Maybe one other place, but this is very interesting. He says one should follow various paths. Usually we hear, take up one path and follow that path. One should practice each creed for a time. Now this is what Sri Ramakrishna did. But generally he wouldn't say this to others. In a game of satrancha, this is some type of board game with the tiles that go around squares. A piece can't reach the center square until it completes the circle. But once in the circle, it can't be overtaken by any other piece. Now, I have to guess at what Sri Ramakrishna means, because it's not very, very clear. But in order to remove any sectarianism, it's very helpful if we see a different spiritual path from within and not from without. And I think this is very, very important, that when we look at other religions, we see it very superficially. And if we really want to have this understanding that everyone is sincerely trying to follow their spiritual path and have some deeper type of experience, we can't do it unless we go within. So Sri Ramakrishna was very, very particular when he followed his spiritual path, that he did it the way they did it. He didn't do it as an outsider, but as an insider. And he used to say that I even wore the clothes that they would wear. When he practiced some Vaishnava traditions, he would wear this long gown, and he would put on the tulsi mala, and do all of those things that will bring association to his mind and allow him to experience it the way they experienced it. And this is how he could see things from the inside. So he tried all of these different things and saw the truth and efficacy in them. Now, when Thakur says all religions are true, he doesn't mean that each and everything that they say is final and absolutely true. Otherwise, they'll contradict each other. The essence of it, and if one practices any of these time-honored traditions with great sincerity, that one can have the highest realization through that. he never meant to, even he said, even our own traditions, he said, you think that Hindu tradition or mother worship, you think there are no erroneous things in this? He said, well, we have to adjust our clock to the sun every once in a while. That every tradition will have certain things that are disposable. Even scripture, that even what we call our shruti, it'll be a little bit of a combination of sugar and sand. So we just discard the sand. We don't worry about it. That doesn't take away from the value of the sugar. Or he says with cooking a fish, you cut off the head and the tail. You don't have to take all of the extraneous things. Take the essential things. Of course, the head and the tail are the two best parts. Okay. So, he says, but once in the square, it can't be overtaken by any other piece. M. That is true, sir. Master, there are two classes of yogis, the Bahudakas and the Kutichakas. Now, Bahudaka, these two terms we find in the Panchadashi. Huh? Oh, Jivan Mukti Viveka. Good. Yeah. Kumar and I started reading that, and quickly we realized it was too hard for us, so we put it down. But we find that there, Bahu and Udaka. Bahu is many, and Udaka means water. Tirtha and Udaka is the same thing. So somebody who goes to, most tirthas, holy places, were on the banks of a river or lake or something. So this is Bahudaka, somebody a sadhu who will go from one holy place to another holy place. And the others, the Kutichakas, Kutiya, that means they'll stay in a hut someplace. They don't wander around anywhere. These are two different types, and Thakur would refer to it very often, and as the second being more mature stage. He said the Bahudakas roam about visiting various holy places and have not yet found peace of mind. But the Kutichakas, having visited all the sacred places, have quieted their minds. Feeling serene and peaceful, they settle down in one place and no longer move about. In that one place, they are happy. They don't feel the need of going to any sacred place. If one of them ever visits a place of pilgrimage, it is only for the purpose of new inspiration. Now, mostly sadhus go from place to place. The direct disciples, what did they do? They did both. They would go to places of pilgrimage, but we'll see, let's say Swami Brahmananda, Swami Turiyananda, they would go and spend long months in Vrindavan or Narmada, one place like that. It's just in a hut day after day doing their meditation. But there is some inspiration that comes from going to a holy place. So from time to time they would do that also. I had to practice each religion for a time. Why? I had to. Why does he say that? Because the Divine Mother led him. Not that it was necessary for him, but it was necessary for the world to get that teaching, and for the world to know that there was someone who is not speaking theoretically when he says all the paths lead to God, that someone has actually done it. So the Divine Mother had him do this. I had to practice each religion for a time. Hinduism, Islam, Christianity. Hinduism was, of course, with many different schools of Hinduism, the Shaktas, the Vaishnavas. Islam was the Sufi school, and just for a few days. Christianity, he didn't really do Christian discipline. It was more that he listened to recitations from the Bible, the Christian Bible, and had some direct experience, some vision, looking at the painting of the Madonna and baby Christ. Furthermore, I followed the paths of the Shaktas. Now this will be within Hinduism. The Shaktas, that means worshippers of the Divine Mother. The Vaishnavas, this will be mostly worshippers of Rama and Krishna. And these two forms, the Vaishnava tradition. And Vedantists. When he says Vedanta, he means it's a Dvaita Vedanta experience with a Totapuri. I realized that there is only one God to whom all are traveling, but the paths are different. So this was his realization, because he reached the roof. When he talks about you can climb up to a ladder and a rope and all of this, he went up to all of the different the means of getting up there. While visiting the holy places, I would sometimes suffer great agony. Once I went with Mathur. He was, of course, the patron of Sri Ramakrishna, took him on a long pilgrimage, to Raja Babu's drawing room in Benares. I found that they talked there only of worldly matters. These are all the rich men getting together in one room, talking about their properties, and they were all landlords, and all the difficulties they had running this and running that. So Thakur, of course, would have been miserable having to sit to listen to all of these things. I found that they talked there only of worldly matters, money, real estate, and the like. At this I burst into tears. I said to the Divine Mother, weeping, "Mother, where hast thou brought me? I was much better off at Dakshineshwar." In Allahabad, I noticed the same things that I saw elsewhere, the same ponds, the same grass, the same trees, the same tamarind leaves. But one undoubtedly finds inspiration in a holy place. I accompanied Mathur Babu to Vrindavan. Hriday and the ladies of Mathur's family were in our party. No sooner did I see the Kaliya Daman Ghat. These are all incidents in the life of Sri Krishna, killing this demon Kaliya. Then a divine emotion surged up within me. I was completely overwhelmed. Hriday used to bathe me there as if I were a small child. So it'll go on with this. Thakur is talking about how not necessary to go to these places of pilgrimage, and yet he had so many intense spiritual experiences, one after another, because his spiritual consciousness would be awakened in these places, and he would feel the presence of the divine, whatever aspect it was, in these different places. So we'll stop here. We have just another page or two in this advice to householders. Om Niranjanam Nityamanantarupam Bhaktanukham Bhathuravikraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamhedyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who was stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you all for joining us, and have a good week, and we'll see you next time.